You don't belong in this courtroom, and you know it." The words hit like a slap. Judge Dwight Harlan leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, staring down from the bench at the black woman standing alone at the respondent's table. His lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer, the kind of expression that said he'd already decided the outcome before the first word was spoken. The woman didn't flinch, didn't look away, just stood there with a worn leather notebook open in front of her, pen poised over a blank page. Harlan had no idea he was being evaluated, no idea the woman he'd just insulted held the highest judicial authority in the nation, no idea that every word, every gesture, every procedural violation was being documented for a federal investigation that would end his 22-year career. He thought she was just another pro-se litigant, another nuisance to dismiss before lunch. He was about to learn otherwise. If you're hooked already, hit that subscribe button. This satisfying story of satisfying justice is just getting started. 48 hours earlier, Nadine Achebe had driven her rental car across the Stillwater Lift Bridge as the morning sun turned the St. Croix River into liquid gold. The bridge's steel towers rose against a cloudless April sky, and for a moment, she allowed herself to remember the last time she'd crossed this bridge, 31 years ago, holding her Aunt Eugenia's hand, watching the water below with the wide eyes of a law school student who still believed justice was simple. Eugenia had laughed at her then. "Justice isn't simple, child. Justice is a river. Sometimes it flows smooth, sometimes it floods, and sometimes," she'd squeezed Nadine's hand, "sometimes you have to dig the channel yourself." Now Eugenia was gone, buried 3 weeks ago in the family plot behind the AME Church on Main Street, and the house where 5 generations of Achebes had been born, married, mourned, and celebrated, was being claimed by Northland Development Corporation through a quiet title action that smelled like fraud dressed up in legal terminology. Nadine had read the court filings on the flight from Washington. The developer claimed Eugenia had signed a quit-claim deed 6 months before her death, transferring the property for $18,000. $18,000 for a riverfront home worth $800,000. The signature on the deed looked nothing like Eugenia's careful, old-fashioned script. The notary who'd witnessed it had died 2 months later, convenient timing that made verification impossible. The case had been assigned to Judge Dwight Harlan, Probate Division, Room 204. Nadine had requested the assignment through back channels, using her position on the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee to arrange an undercover evaluation. 23 complaints in 14 years. Pattern of dismissing pro-se litigants of color. Rushing hearings. Denying continuances. Making comments that weren't quite actionable, but left a trail of devastated plaintiffs who'd lost homes, businesses, custody rights. The committee had been watching Harlan for 3 years. They needed someone on the inside, someone whose presence wouldn't raise suspicion, someone who could document the bias firsthand. Nadine had volunteered the moment she learned her aunt's estate was being contested in his courtroom, personal and professional. The lines blurred in ways that made her uncomfortable, but Eugenia's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes you have to dig the channel yourself. So here she was, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, driving a rented Honda Accord, wearing a cardigan and sensible flats, about to represent herself in a probate dispute against a corporation with more lawyers than she had fingers. The town of Stillwater spread out before her. Historic brick buildings, antique shops, tourists already gathering for the morning farmers market. Picturesque. Peaceful. The kind of place that put Minnesota nice on bumper stickers and believed it. Nadine had learned long ago that nice and just weren't the same thing. She checked into a bed and breakfast on Olive Street, paid cash, gave her name as N. Achebe. The owner, a white woman with silver hair and a warm smile, had looked at her credit card, a personal account, not government-issued, and asked, "Any relation to the Achebes on River Road?" "Eugenia was my aunt." The woman's face softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss. She was a wonderful woman. Baked the best pecan pie in Washington County. A pause. You here for the hearing? I am. That developer. The woman shook her head. They've been buying up properties all along the river. Old families, mostly. Folks who don't have lawyers. She handed over the room key. You have a lawyer? Nadine smiled. I have experience. The Washington County Courthouse occupied a full block of downtown Stillwater, red brick, white columns, a dome that gleamed copper in the spring sunlight. Built in 1867, according to the bronze plaque by the entrance. Renovated in 1952 and again in 2008. The kind of building that announced itself as a temple of justice, while the reality inside often fell short of the architecture's promises. Nadine arrived at 8:45 for a 9 o'clock hearing. Early enough to observe, late enough to avoid unnecessary conversation. The security checkpoint was staffed by a single guard, a thick-necked man in his 50s whose name tag read Jernigan. He sat behind a metal detector that looked older than the building's last renovation, a newspaper open on the desk beside him, a styrofoam cup of coffee leaving rings on the sports section. Nadine placed her bag on the conveyor belt, walked through the detector. No beep. Jernigan didn't look up from his newspaper. She retrieved her bag, checked that her notebook and documents were undisturbed, and started toward the stairs. Hold it. She stopped, turned. Jernigan was looking at her now, eyes moving from her face to her bag to her shoes and back again. The kind of look that cataloged and categorized. The kind of look she'd seen 1,000 times in 1,000 different places, always with the same subtext. You don't belong here. Where you headed? Room 204, probate hearing. That courtroom doesn't open until 8:55. I'll wait in the hallway. Jernigan pushed back from his desk, newspaper forgotten. He was bigger than he'd looked sitting down, 6'2", maybe 220, with forearms that suggested decades of physical work before he'd taken this job. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, the way men walk when they want you to understand they're in control. You a lawyer? I'm representing myself. His eyebrows rose. Pro se, huh? The words came out with a particular inflection. Amused. Dismissive. Judge Harlan doesn't have much patience for pro se litigants. I'll keep that in mind. She turned to go. Ma'am? His voice sharpened. I asked you a question. You got ID? Nadine paused, counted to 3, turned back to face him with the same neutral expression she used during oral arguments when opposing counsel said something particularly absurd. You didn't ask me a question. You made a statement about Judge Harlan's patience. She kept her voice level, factual. But yes, I have identification. My driver's license is in my wallet. I showed it at the entrance. Show it again. Is there a reason you're asking? Jernigan's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being questioned, certainly not by a black woman in a cardigan who looked like she should be teaching Sunday school rather than standing in his lobby asking about reasons. Building security. I can ask anyone for ID at any time. This was technically true. Courthouse security personnel had broad discretion under Minnesota statute, but discretion, applied selectively, became discrimination, a distinction Jernigan clearly didn't understand or didn't care about. Nadine reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and handed over her Minnesota driver's license. The address listed was Eugenia's house, the address she'd used for 30 years, the address that still appeared on her voter registration and her tax returns, the address that Northland Development was trying to steal. Jernigan studied the license far longer than necessary. Checked the photo against her face, checked the address, wrote something down on a notepad beside the security station. This address is on River Road. Yes. The Achebe property. My aunt's house. Now my house. Jernigan's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or realization that this encounter had just become more complicated than he'd expected. You're the one fighting Northland. I'm the respondent in a quiet title action, yes. He handed back the license. His demeanor hadn't softened exactly, but the aggressive edge had retreated slightly. Good luck with that, he said. You're going to need it. Room 204 smelled like old wood, older paper, and the particular institutional staleness that accumulated in spaces where air conditioning systems were older than the staff who maintained them. Nadine took a seat in the second row of the gallery, choosing a position that gave her a clear view of both the bench and the respondent's table, where she'd soon be standing. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Maybe 40 seats in the gallery, a single counsel table on each side of the aisle. The bench elevated on a platform that added perhaps 18 inches to whoever sat behind it, enough to create the illusion of authority, the physical manifestation of power differential that courts had been using since English common law. A woman sat at a desk to the right of the bench, late 40s, blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, reading glasses perched on her nose as she sorted through a stack of files. Her nameplate read, Sutton Merriweather, Court Clerk. She didn't look up when Nadine entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. At 8:52, the petitioner's table filled with bodies. 3 men in matching charcoal suits, leather briefcases, yellow legal pads, the Northland Development legal team. Nadine recognized the lead attorney from her research, Brock Hensley, partner at Hensley & Associates, specialist in real estate litigation, known for aggressive tactics and a win rate that came from choosing fights he couldn't lose. Hensley was tall, tanned, with silver hair that suggested distinction rather than age, and teeth that were too white to be natural. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never lost a case in this courtroom, who knew the judge by first name, who probably played golf at the same club and attended the same fundraisers. He glanced at Nadine as he took his seat. A quick assessment. Woman. Black. Alone. No briefcase. No legal pad. Just a worn leather notebook and a pen. His smile was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted easy prey. Good morning. His voice carried across the courtroom, performative friendliness for anyone who might be listening. Are you Ms. Achebe? I am. Brock Hensley, Northland Development. He didn't offer his hand, didn't cross the aisle, just nodded in her direction like she was an obstacle to be acknowledged before being removed. This matter could still be resolved outside of court. My client is prepared to increase their offer to $25,000. That's a significant improvement over the original deed consideration. Nadine wrote something in her notebook, didn't look up. The original deed is fraudulent. That's a serious allegation. It's a factual statement. Actual, the signature doesn't match my aunt's handwriting. The notary died before verification could occur. The consideration was roughly 3% of fair market value. She finally met his eyes. If your client wants to settle, they can withdraw the quiet title action and acknowledge that my aunt never signed that deed. Hensley's smile didn't waver, but something hardened behind it. Ms. Achebe, I've been practicing real estate law in this county for 23 years. I know how these cases go. Pro se litigants rarely fare well against experienced counsel. I'm offering you a way out. I appreciate your concern for my welfare. Her tone suggested she appreciated it about as much as a root canal, but I'll take my chances with the evidence. Before Hensley could respond, the side door opened and Deputy Vance Kellner entered. Early 30s, close-cropped hair, the kind of muscular build that suggested regular gym attendance and possibly steroid assistance. He positioned himself near the bench, hands clasped in front of him, eyes scanning the courtroom with practiced alertness. His gaze settled on Nadine, stayed there a beat too long. All rise, Sutton Merriweather's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. The Washington County Probate Court is now in session, the Honorable Dwight Harlan presiding. Nadine rose with everyone else, watching the door behind the bench, waiting for her first look at the man who'd generated 23 complaints and still sat on the bench dispensing what passed for justice in this corner of Minnesota. Judge Dwight Harlan entered like a man who owned the room, which, in a very real sense, he did. 62 years old, white, with a face that might have been distinguished if not for the permanent expression of mild irritation that suggested everything was beneath him. His robe was slightly rumpled. His hair needed a trim. He carried a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Grandpa," which he set on the bench with a thunk that echoed in the sudden silence. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the papers in front of him. Several seconds passed. Hensley stood patiently. Nadine stood patiently. The silence stretched. Finally, Harlan looked up. His eyes went to Hensley first. A nod of recognition, almost collegial. Then to Nadine. The assessment was quick and brutal. His expression shifted from bored to annoyed in the span of a heartbeat. "In the matter of Northland Development Corporation versus the estate of Eugenia Achebe," he read from the file. "Quiet title action. Mr. Hensley, you're representing the petitioner?" "I am, Your Honor." "And the respondent is—" He checked the file. "Nadine Achebe, appearing pro se." "Yes, Your Honor." Nadine's voice was clear, carrying. "I'm Eugenia Achebe's niece and sole heir." Harlan's eyes narrowed slightly. Something about her voice, the confidence perhaps, or the lack of the nervous deference he expected from pro se litigants, registered as wrong to him. "Ms. Achebe, you understand that this is a formal legal proceeding, that you're entitled to legal representation?" "I'm aware of my rights, Your Honor. I've chosen to represent myself." "That's generally inadvisable. I appreciate the court's concern." The exchange was brief, but Nadine noticed several things. Harlan hadn't offered the same warning to previous pro se litigants, according to the complaint files she'd reviewed. He was already establishing a record of having advised her to get a lawyer, covering himself for whatever came next. "Very well." Harlan shuffled papers. "Mr. Hensley, your client is seeking to quiet title on the property at 4721 River Road. You're claiming ownership based on a quitclaim deed dated October 15th of last year. Is that correct?" "That's correct, Your Honor. We've submitted the deed, properly notarized, showing that Ms. Eugenia Achebe transferred ownership to Northland Development Corporation for the consideration of $18,000. Nadine wrote in her notebook. "Ms. Achebe." Harlan's voice sharpened. "Do you dispute the validity of this deed?" "I do, Your Honor. I'm challenging the deed on 3 grounds: fraudulent signature, inadequate consideration suggesting duress or incapacity, and procedural irregularities in the notarization." "Those are serious allegations." "Yes, Your Honor. I have evidence to support each one." Harlan leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. His expression suggested she'd just told him she could fly. "Evidence," he repeated. "What kind of evidence?" "Handwriting analysis comparing the signature on the deed to known samples of my aunt's writing. Financial records showing the property's market value at approximately $800,000, 44 times the stated consideration, and documentation showing that the notary, Gerald Simmons, was disciplined by the Minnesota Secretary of State in 2019 for improper notarization practices." The courtroom went quiet. Hensley's smile had frozen in place. Behind Nadine, someone in the gallery whispered something. Harlan's face darkened. "Ms. Achebe, this isn't the time for evidentiary presentations. This is a preliminary hearing to establish the parties' positions." "With respect, Your Honor, the court's scheduling notice indicated this was a hearing on the merits. The respondent was instructed to be prepared to present evidence." She pulled a document from her bag, a copy of the court's own notice, dated 3 weeks earlier. Harlan's signature was at the bottom. "That's—" Harlan paused, visibly recalculating. "The notice may have been unclear. Today's hearing is preliminary only. Evidentiary matters will be addressed at a later date." "Your Honor, the notice is quite specific. Section 3 states that all parties should be prepared to present evidence and witness testimony. I have a handwriting expert available to testify via video conference. I've also subpoenaed records from the Secretary of State's office regarding the notary's disciplinary history." Hensley was on his feet. "Your Honor, we received no notice of any expert witnesses or subpoenas." The subpoenas were filed with the court clerk's office on March 28th. Nadine turned to Sutton Merriweather. Ms. Merriweather should have copies. Every eye in the courtroom turned to the clerk. Merriweather's face flushed. She rifled through the files on her desk, movements jerky, papers shuffling. 10 seconds passed. 20. I don't seem to have... She looked up at Harlan. Your Honor, I don't have any record of subpoenas in this case. I have copies of the filed documents with timestamps from this office. Nadine pulled another set of papers from her bag. I'd like these entered into the record. Harlan's knuckles whitened on the edge of the bench. The room had shifted, and he didn't like the new configuration. Pro se litigants weren't supposed to be organized, weren't supposed to have evidence, weren't supposed to catch the court clerk in what was either incompetence or something worse. Ms. Achebe. His voice had dropped to something cold. I'll remind you that this court operates on established procedures. You don't get to walk in here and make demands. I'm not making demands, Your Honor. I'm exercising my rights under Minnesota Rules of Civil Procedure. Rule 16.01 requires disclosure of expert witnesses at least 21 days before trial. I've exceeded that requirement. Rule 45 governs subpoenas for document production. I've complied with those requirements as well. Want to see what happens when justice meets corruption? Subscribe now. You won't want to miss what comes next. Harlan's face had gone from irritated to something closer to rage, but he was experienced enough to keep it controlled. Barely. Mr. Hensley, do you have any response to the respondent's claims about these subpoenas? Your Honor, we obviously can't respond to documents we've never seen. If Ms. Achebe filed subpoenas, she should have served copies on opposing counsel as required by rule. Service was completed by certified mail on March 29th. Nadine held up another document. I have the signed return receipt, signature of Marcus Way, listed as Mr. Hensley's paralegal. The second attorney at Northland's table, younger, Asian, clearly junior, went pale. He leaned over and whispered something to Hensley. Hensley's jaw tightened. Your Honor, we'll need time to review these documents. Of course you will. Harlan seemed almost relieved to have an excuse to end this. Ms. Achebe, the court will take your filings under advisement. This hearing is continued until... He checked his calendar. May 15th, 9 a.m. Both parties should be prepared to address the evidentiary issues at that time. Your Honor, with respect, the matter is continued, Ms. Achebe. That's my ruling. Nadine wrote in her notebook, nodded once. I'd like the record to reflect that the continuance was granted over the respondent's objection and that the respondent was prepared to proceed today as scheduled. Harlan's smile was thin and cold. The record will reflect whatever the court determines is appropriate. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. Nadine gathered her papers slowly, methodically, aware of the eyes on her from every direction. Hensley was conferring with his team in urgent whispers. Merriweather was pretending to organize files while shooting glances at the bench. Deputy Kellner had moved closer to the respondent's table, positioning himself between Nadine and the exit. She had expected resistance, had expected the judge to be hostile. What she hadn't expected was how blatant it would be. The manufactured continuance, the lost subpoenas, the immediate alliance between bench and petitioner. 23 complaints. 14 years. And still he sat there, dispensing injustice in a building that called itself a courthouse. She was almost to the gallery when Hensley intercepted her. Ms. Achebe. His voice was lower now, meant only for her. That was quite a performance. It wasn't a performance. It was legal procedure. You've clearly done some research. That's admirable. He fell into step beside her, walking toward the courtroom doors. But research only gets you so far. Judge Harlan doesn't like being embarrassed in his own courtroom. I didn't embarrass anyone. I presented evidence. You challenged his clerk. That's the same thing. Hensley held the door open for her, a gesture of courtesy that felt like a threat. My offer stands. $30,000. That's my final number. Take it, and this all goes away. Nadine stopped in the doorway, turned to face him. Mr. Hensley, that property has been in my family for 5 generations. My great-great-grandmother bought it in 1893 with money she saved working as a domestic servant for 30 years. My grandmother was born in that house. My mother was born in that house. My aunt lived there for 81 years. She held his gaze. You can offer me $30,000 or $3 million. The answer is the same. That deed is fraudulent, and I'm going to prove it. Hensley's smile finally cracked. Just a little. Just enough to show the steel underneath. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I think I'm beginning to. She walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The hallway was empty except for a woman sitting on the bench outside room 204. Early 60s, black, wearing a floral dress that had been pressed with care and shoes that had been resoled at least once. She stood up when Nadine emerged, eyes bright with something between hope and desperation. Excuse me, you're Ms. Achebe? The one from the River Road case? Nadine paused. I am. I heard what you did in there. The woman's voice trembled slightly. How you stood up to them. How you knew all the rules. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. My name is Dorothy Stokes. I lost my house to Northland 2 years ago. Same thing. A deed I never signed. A judge who wouldn't listen. I'm sorry. I'm not asking for sorry. Dorothy reached into her purse, pulled out a folded envelope. I'm asking if you'll look at this. My case files. The signatures. The dates. She pressed the envelope into Nadine's hands. There's a pattern, Ms. Achebe. I know there is, but nobody will listen to an old woman who lost her case. Nadine looked at the envelope, looked at Dorothy Stokes's face, the weariness, the anger, the stubborn refusal to give up. I'll look at it, she said. I can't promise anything. That's more than anyone else has given me. Dorothy hurried away before Nadine could respond, disappearing down the stairs with the quick steps of someone who didn't want to be seen. Nadine stood alone in the hallway, the envelope heavy in her hands. 23 complaints. How many more hadn't been filed? How many Dorothy Stokes were scattered across Washington County, their homes stolen, their appeals denied, their faith in justice eroded to nothing? She tucked the envelope into her bag and headed for the exit. Jernigan was waiting at the security checkpoint. Not sitting this time, standing, arms crossed, positioned directly in the path between Nadine and the front doors. Ms. Achebe. She stopped. Mr. Jernigan. Heard you had an interesting morning. Word travels fast. Small courthouse. He didn't move aside. Judge Harlan's been on this bench for 22 years. He's well respected in this community. I'm sure he is. People who come in here and cause trouble. Jernigan let the sentence hang. They usually regret it. Is that a threat, Mr. Jernigan? It's advice. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. You're from out of town. You don't understand how things work here. The smart move is to take whatever Hensley's offering and go back to wherever you came from. Nadine held his gaze, counted to 3. Let the silence stretch until his confidence wavered, just slightly. I'm from here, Mr. Jernigan. My family has been in Washington County since before that bridge was built. My aunt taught Sunday school at Mount Zion AME for 47 years. My grandmother donated the land for the community garden on Olive Street. She stepped forward, and something in her posture made him step back. So when you tell me to go back where I came from, you should know. I'm already here, and I'm not leaving until justice is done. She walked past him before he could respond, out the front doors, into the April sunshine. But as she descended the courthouse steps, she felt his eyes on her back. And she knew that the real battle had only just begun. The afternoon brought clouds and a dropping temperature, the kind of weather that reminded Minnesota residents why they kept winter coats in their closets until June. Nadine spent 3 hours in her room at the bed and breakfast, reviewing the documents Dorothy Stokes had given her. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. 12 properties, all in predominantly black or mixed-race neighborhoods, all acquired by Northland Development or its subsidiaries between 2019 and 2023, all through quitclaim deeds with consideration well below market value, all with notarization by Gerald Simmons, the same notary whose name appeared on Eugenia's deed. Simmons had died in January of this year. Heart attack, according to the obituary Dorothy had included. Convenient timing, Nadine thought. Dead notaries couldn't be deposed. But dead notaries left records, and records could be subpoenaed, if you knew where to look. She called her clerk in Washington. I need everything the Minnesota Secretary of State has on a notary named Gerald Simmons. Appointment date, renewal records, disciplinary actions, everything. Justice Achebe, is this related to official court business? It's related to my aunt's estate. A pause. And possibly to a federal civil rights matter. I'll have it by tomorrow morning. She hung up, returned to the documents. Names and dates swam before her eyes. 12 families, 12 homes, millions of dollars in property, transferred for pennies through signatures that nobody had verified until it was too late. And at the center of it all, Judge Dwight Harlan, rubber-stamping every quiet title action, denying every appeal, making it impossible for victims to fight back through the legal system he controlled. The committee had suspected corruption. Nadine was beginning to realize they'd underestimated the scope. At 6 p.m., she walked to the house on River Road. The sun was setting over the Mississippi, painting the water in shades of gold and orange that would have made Eugenia reach for her watercolors. The house stood on a slight rise, white clapboard with green shutters, a wraparound porch that faced the river. Eugenia's roses still bloomed in the front garden. She'd planted them 30 years ago, and they'd survived every winter since. Nadine let herself in with the key the estate attorney had given her. The interior smelled like lavender and old books, and the particular mustiness of a house that had been closed up too long. Eugenia's furniture was still in place. The velvet sofa she'd recovered herself, the dining table with its water rings from 100 Sunday dinners, the piano in the corner where Nadine had learned to play Amazing Grace at age 7. She walked through the rooms slowly, touching surfaces, opening drawers, looking for anything that might help her case. Eugenia had been organized, bills filed by month, correspondence sorted by sender, tax returns going back to 1972. But there was no quitclaim deed in any of the files, no correspondence with Northland Development, no evidence that Eugenia had ever considered selling the property, because she hadn't. Nadine was certain of it now. The deed was a forgery, the signature was fake, and someone, Simmons or whoever had used Simmons's notary stamp, had created a document that would transfer 5 generations of family history to a corporation that wanted to tear it down and build condominiums. She was sitting on the porch, watching the last light fade over the river, when her phone rang, a Washington number she didn't recognize. Justice Achebe? This is Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI, Minneapolis Field Office. Nadine straightened. How did you get this number? Your clerk in Washington. I apologize for the unorthodox contact, but we need to talk. It's about Northland Development. I'm listening. Not on the phone. A pause. There's a diner on Main Street. The Oak Table. Can you meet me in 30 minutes? Nadine looked at the darkening river, at the house where 5 generations of her family had lived and died and loved, at the roses that Eugenia would never see bloom again. I'll be there. The Oak Table Diner was the kind of place that had been serving coffee and pie since before Nadine was born. Formica counters, vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner that still played Patsy Cline. The dinner crowd had thinned out by the time she arrived, leaving only a few locals nursing cups of coffee and the smell of frying bacon that had probably been there since 1963. The man in the back booth stood when she approached. Late 40s, black, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of suit that said, "Federal Employee," without shouting it. He didn't offer his hand, too public, just nodded toward the seat across from him. Justice Achebe, thank you for coming. Agent Webb. She sat, set her bag on the bench beside her. You mentioned Northland Development. We've been investigating them for 18 months. Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud across state lines. He slid a folder across the table. They've acquired over 40 properties in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa using forged documents and compromised notaries. Your aunt's house is one of them. Nadine opened the folder. Inside, surveillance photos, financial records, a list of properties that included 4721 River Road. Why are you telling me this? Because you're already in the middle of it. Webb leaned forward. We know about your hearing this morning. We know Harlan continued the case over your objection. And we know that in approximately 72 hours, Northland's attorneys are going to file an emergency motion to expedite the quiet title action, citing your delaying tactics as grounds for immediate judgment. Nadine's stomach tightened. They can't do that. There's no legal basis. There isn't. But Harlan will grant it anyway. He's done it before. Webb tapped the folder. 7 times, to be exact. 7 cases where pro se litigants raised legitimate challenges to Northland's deeds, and 7 times Harlan found procedural excuses to rule against them. You're saying the judge is compromised. I'm saying we don't have enough evidence to prove it. Yet. Webb's voice dropped. But if someone were inside that courtroom documenting his behavior, creating a record that could support a judicial misconduct complaint, or even a criminal referral, you want me to be a witness. I want you to do what you were going to do anyway. He met her eyes. Fight for your aunt's house. Make Harlan show his hand. And let us build the case we need to take them all down. Nadine was quiet for a long moment. The jukebox clicked over to a new song, something old and sad about lost love and broken promises. You know who I am, she said finally. I know you're a Supreme Court justice on leave to handle a family matter. I know you have more legal expertise in your little finger than Harlan has in his entire career. And I know that if anyone can expose what's happening in that courtroom, it's you. And if I get caught? If someone discovers my real identity? Webb's expression didn't change. Then we have a very different problem. One that goes well beyond real estate fraud. Nadine closed the folder, pushed it back across the table. I'll need more than surveillance photos. I'll need copies of the forged deeds, testimony from the victims, financial records showing payments between Northland and anyone connected to the court. We can provide all of that. And I'll need protection. If they realize who I am, what I'm doing, we'll have agents nearby. You won't see them, but they'll be there. She nodded slowly. Then I guess we have an arrangement. Webb's face relaxed slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. One more thing. The clerk, Sutton Merriweather. She's been with Harlan for 12 years. The lost subpoenas today? That wasn't an accident. I suspected. She's also married to Northland's CFO. Webb stood, left a $20 bill on the table for his untouched coffee. Be careful, Justice Achebe. These people have a lot to lose, and they've already shown they're willing to break the law to protect it. He walked out of the diner without looking back. Nadine sat alone in the booth, the folder's contents still visible in her mind. 40 properties, 7 rigged judgments. A judge, a clerk, a corporation, all working together to steal homes from families who had no one to fight for them. Eugenia's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes you have to dig the channel yourself. She was digging now, and she had no idea how deep the corruption went. The next morning brought trouble. Nadine arrived at the bed and breakfast at 8 a.m. to find Jernigan's personal vehicle parked across the street. Not the security guard uniform this time. Civilian clothes, a black pickup truck, watching her window with the casual intensity of someone who wanted to be seen watching. Intimidation. Amateur hour. She walked to her rental car, made eye contact with him through his windshield, held it for 5 full seconds, then drove away without hurrying. He followed for 3 blocks before turning off. Message received. The courthouse was busier than the day before, a full docket, according to the posted schedule, with hearings every 30 minutes. Nadine took a seat in the back of room 204, ostensibly waiting for a bathroom break that she didn't need. What she really wanted was to watch Harlan work. The first case was a contested will. The petitioner was a white man in his 60s, represented by local counsel. The respondent was his younger sister, also white, also represented. Harlan treated both attorneys with professional courtesy, asked clarifying questions, made procedural rulings that were legally sound. The second case was a guardianship matter. Both parties were white. Both were represented. Again, Harlan behaved like a competent judge. The third case was different. The petitioner was a black woman in her 30s, no attorney. She was seeking to modify a custody arrangement based on changed circumstances. She'd gotten a new job, moved to a better apartment, completed parenting classes. The respondent was her ex-husband's family, represented by, Nadine noted with interest, an associate from Hensley's firm. Harlan interrupted the woman's opening statement 3 times, questioned her documentation twice, made her repeat her address, her employer's name, her children's ages, all information that was clearly stated in her filing. When she tried to submit evidence of her completed parenting classes, Harlan held up his hand. "Ms. Thompson, these certificates aren't authenticated. I can't accept them as evidence." "Your Honor, they're from the County Family Services Program. They have official seals. Authentication requires a notarized statement from the issuing authority. You don't have that." "Nobody told me I needed that. The instructions on the court website said to bring copies of all relevant documents. The court website provides general guidance. It doesn't replace legal advice." Harlan's voice carried a patronizing tone that made Nadine's skin prickle. "This is why pro se litigants struggle in our system. You're simply not equipped to navigate the complexities of family law." The opposing attorney smirked. Harlan didn't notice, or didn't care. "Your Honor," Ms. Thompson tried again, "if I could just have a brief continuance to get the authentication." Motion denied. "This case has been pending for 8 months. The children need stability, not endless delays, while their mother learns basic legal procedure." He ruled for the respondent, denied the custody modification, scheduled a review hearing for 6 months in the future, time enough for Ms. Thompson's children to spend another half-year away from her. Nadine wrote it all down. Every interruption, every denied motion, every condescending comment. The pattern was clear, documented now in her own handwriting, another piece of evidence for the case she was building. When the hearing ended, she followed Ms. Thompson into the hallway. The woman was sitting on the bench outside the courtroom, crying quietly into her hands. "Ms. Thompson?" The woman looked up, wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "No, but I saw what happened in there." Nadine sat beside her. "That wasn't fair, and it wasn't legal." "What am I supposed to do? I can't afford a lawyer. I can't even afford to miss another day of work." Ms. Thompson's voice cracked. "My kids. They need me." And he made it impossible. Nadine reached into her bag, pulled out a business card. Not her own. That would raise too many questions. A card for a legal aid organization in Minneapolis that her clerk had recommended. "Call this number. Tell them what happened. They may be able to help you file an appeal." Ms. Thompson took the card, stared at it like it was a life raft in a flood. "Why are you helping me?" Nadine stood. "Because someone should." By noon, Nadine had observed 3 more hearings. The pattern was consistent. White litigants received professional treatment. Black and brown litigants received obstruction, condescension, and adverse rulings that often contradicted the evidence presented. She was leaving the courthouse for lunch when Deputy Kellner stepped into her path. "Ms. Achebe." "Deputy?" "Judge Harlan would like to see you in his chambers." This wasn't standard procedure. Judges didn't summon litigants to private meetings without their attorneys present, and in Nadine's case, without opposing counsel present. The request itself was a potential ethics violation, but refusing might raise suspicion, and she wanted to see what Harlan had to say. "Lead the way." Harlan's chambers were on the 2nd floor, down a hallway that smelled like furniture polish and old cigarettes. The door was open when they arrived. Kellner gestured for her to enter, then closed the door behind her and remained in the hallway. Witness eliminated. Whatever was about to happen, Harlan wanted no record. The judge sat behind a mahogany desk that was too large for the room, surrounded by law books that looked like they hadn't been opened since his confirmation. His robe hung on a coat rack in the corner. Without it, he looked smaller, more ordinary, less intimidating. "Ms. Achebe, please, sit down." She remained standing. "I don't think that's appropriate, Your Honor. Ex parte communication with a litigant is prohibited under Canon 3B7 of the Minnesota Code of Judicial Conduct." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "You know the Code of Judicial Conduct." "I know the law." "So you keep demonstrating." He leaned back in his chair. "Where did you go to law school?" The question was a trap. Answer truthfully. Yale. And she revealed more than she wanted to. Lie, and she opened herself to discovery. "I don't see how that's relevant to my case." "It's relevant because I'm trying to understand who I'm dealing with." Harlan steepled his fingers. "You walk into my courtroom dressed like a church volunteer, speaking like a federal prosecutor. You cite rules of civil procedure from memory. You catch my clerk in an administrative error within 5 minutes of the hearing." He paused. "You're not what you appear to be." "I'm exactly what I appear to be. A grieving niece trying to protect her family's home from a corporation that forged my aunt's signature." "That's a serious allegation." "You said that yesterday. It's still true." Harlan stood, walked around his desk, stopped perhaps 3 feet from where Nadine stood, close enough that she could see the broken capillaries on his nose, the coffee stain on his cuff. "Let me be direct, Ms. Achebe. Northland Development is an important business in this community. They've invested millions of dollars in riverfront property. They've created jobs. They've improved neighborhoods." His voice dropped. "Your aunt's property is a piece of that vision. A small piece, yes, but a necessary one. The deed is valid. The sale was legal, and the sooner you accept that, the better for everyone." "Including you?" His face went still. "What's that supposed to mean?" Nadine met his gaze without flinching. "It means that 7 quiet title actions have been decided in Northland's favor in this courtroom over the past 4 years. 7 cases where pro se litigants raised challenges to deed validity. 7 cases where those challenges were dismissed on procedural grounds." She paused. "That's a pattern, Your Honor, and patterns have a way of attracting attention." The silence stretched. Harlan's jaw worked. His hands, hanging at his sides, curled into fists and then uncurled. "You're threatening me." "I'm stating facts, the same thing I did in your courtroom yesterday." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, the faint hint of cigar smoke on his clothes. "You should be very careful, Ms. Achebe. Very careful about the enemies you make in a small town." "Is that a threat, Your Honor?" "It's advice." The same word Jernigan had used, the same tone. "Take the settlement. Go back to wherever you came from, and forget you ever heard the name Northland Development." Nadine held her ground, kept her voice level. "I told your security guard yesterday, and I'll tell you the same thing. I'm from here. This is my home, and I'm not leaving until justice is done." Harlan's face twisted into something ugly. "Justice. You think you know what justice is?" "I've spent my life studying it." "Then you should know that justice in my courtroom means whatever I say it means." He turned his back on her, walked to his window, stared out at the river view he probably thought he deserved. "Get out of my chambers, and be prepared for the consequences of your choices." Nadine walked to the door, opened it, paused. "Your Honor?" He didn't turn. Canon 2A of the Minnesota Code of Judicial Conduct requires judges to act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary. She let the words settle. "This conversation will be included in my documentation." She closed the door on his silence and walked away. The bed and breakfast owner was waiting when Nadine returned that afternoon. Her name was Margaret Chen, no relation to the Chen family from previous stories, and her face was drawn with concern. "Miss Achebe, I need to show you something." She led Nadine upstairs, to her room. The door was already open. Inside, the space had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, contents scattered, the mattress torn from the bed, her suitcase emptied, clothes thrown across the floor. And on the mirror above the dresser, written in what looked like red marker, "Go home." Nadine stood in the doorway, taking it all in, documenting the scene in her mind before anything was moved. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said, voice trembling. "I was out this morning. I came back and found it like this. I've already called the police." "Don't!" "What?" Nadine turned to face her. "Don't call the police. Cancel the call if you've already made it." "But this is breaking and entering. Vandalism. They destroyed your things. They destroyed clothes and searched luggage I left here specifically to be searched." Nadine's voice was calm, controlled. "Everything important is in my bag. Everything critical is in a secure location they'll never find." Margaret stared at her. "You expected this?" "I expected something like this." Nadine walked into the room, careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. She pulled out her phone, began photographing every detail: the scattered clothes, the torn mattress, the message on the mirror. Evidence, documentation, ammunition for the fight to come. "Ms. Achebe, who are you? Really?" Nadine looked at her, at the bed and breakfast owner who'd known Eugenia for 40 years, who'd baked casseroles for the funeral, who'd asked about the hearing with the kind of genuine concern that couldn't be faked. "I'm someone who's going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Part 2 is going to change everything. That evening, Nadine moved her base of operations to Eugenia's house. The bed and breakfast was compromised. Whether Margaret was involved or simply had inadequate security didn't matter. The house on River Road was defensible. More importantly, it was hers. She spent 2 hours installing new locks, checking windows, setting up a basic security system that would alert her phone if any door or window was opened. Then she sat at Eugenia's kitchen table, surrounded by documents, and began to assemble the pieces. Dorothy Stokes's case files, Agent Webb's surveillance folder, her own notes from the courtroom observations, Harlan's threat in his chambers, the ransacked room. The picture that emerged was clear. Northland Development, with Harlan's assistance and Merriweather's complicity, had been systematically stealing property from vulnerable homeowners for at least 4 years. The operation was sophisticated: forged deeds, compromised notaries, procedural manipulation in the courtroom, but it had weaknesses. Gerald Simmons was dead, but his notary records were still on file with the Secretary of State. The 12 property transfers Dorothy had documented all used his stamp. If Nadine could prove the stamp was used after Simmons's death, or by someone other than Simmons, the entire scheme would collapse. She was deep in the records when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Emergency motion filed. Hearing tomorrow, 9 a.m. Harlan presiding. They're accelerating. Agent Webb. Warning her, as promised. Nadine checked her watch. 8:47 p.m. She had 12 hours to prepare for a hearing that could end her case and expose or bury everything she'd discovered. She started with the subpoenas she'd filed for the notary's records. According to the filing timestamps, they should have been served on the Secretary of State's office last week. A quick call to her clerk in Washington confirmed the records had been produced. They were sitting in a FedEx facility in Minneapolis, waiting for pickup. "Have them delivered tonight," she said. "Emergency courier. I'll pay whatever it costs." "Justice Achebe, it's almost 9 o'clock. Then find someone who works nights." A pause. Then, "Yes, ma'am." She hung up, returned to the documents. Somewhere in this pile was the key, the detail that would unravel the whole operation. She just had to find it before morning. The courier arrived at 11:42 p.m., A young white man in a FedEx uniform, clearly confused about why he was delivering legal documents to a riverfront house in the middle of the night. "Sign here, ma'am." Nadine signed. Tipped him $20. Closed the door. Inside the package, Gerald Simmons's complete notary file. 347 documents. Commission date, renewal records, disciplinary actions, and most importantly, a list of every transaction his stamp had authenticated in the past 6 years. She spread them across the kitchen table, started sorting by date. October 15th of last year, the date on Eugenia's forged deed. Simmons's log showed 16 notarizations that day. 16. The man had been 74 years old, living in a nursing home after a stroke in 2021. Nadine checked the address on his most recent renewal form. Sunrise Senior Care. She knew that facility. Eugenia had visited friends there, complained about the tiny rooms and the terrible coffee. A notary in a nursing home, after a stroke, processing 16 property transactions in a single day. Impossible. Unless someone else was using his stamp. She pulled up Simmons's death certificate on her laptop. Date of death, January 15th, 2024. Cause, myocardial infarction. Signed by Dr. Harold Peterson, Sunrise Senior Care. Then she checked his notary log again. January 3rd, 2024. 3 transactions. January 8th, 2024. 5 transactions. January 12th, 2024. 2 transactions. All within the last 2 weeks of his life. All for properties that ended up owned by Northland Development or its subsidiaries. And then, the detail that made her breath catch. January 19th, 2024, 4 days after his death. 2 transactions. His stamp, his signature. On properties that would later appear in Harlan's courtroom. Gerald Simmons had notarized documents after he was dead. Nadine sat back in her chair, staring at the evidence. This wasn't just fraud. This was a criminal conspiracy involving forged documents, identity theft, and judicial corruption. And she had proof. At 6 a.m., her phone rang. Agent Webb. "Did you get the records?" "I got them. Gerald Simmons notarized 2 transactions 4 days after his death." Silence on the line. Then, "That's federal. That's beyond federal. That's RICO territory. Can you prove chain of custody? Prove the records weren't altered?" "They came directly from the Secretary of State's office. Certified copies with state seals." Another pause. "Justice Achebe, the hearing is in 3 hours. If you present this evidence, Harlan will try to suppress it. I know. He'll do worse than that. You're about to blow open a conspiracy that includes a sitting judge, a major developer, and God knows who else. These people have already ransacked your hotel room. What do you think they'll do when they realize you can destroy them?" Nadine looked out the window at the rising sun over the Mississippi. The river flowed past, indifferent to human justice, carrying water toward the Gulf, the same way it had for 10,000 years. "Agent Webb, my aunt spent 81 years in this house. She survived Jim Crow. She survived the Civil Rights era. She survived the war on drugs, mass incarceration, 1,000 different systems designed to take everything she had." Nadine's voice hardened, and at the end, she died peacefully in her bed, in the house her grandmother bought with 30 years of domestic wages. That house is still standing. That legacy is still real, and I will not let a corrupt judge and a criminal developer steal it. Then be careful, very careful, and remember, we're watching. He hung up. Nadine gathered her documents, her notes, her evidence, put on her cardigan and her sensible shoes, checked her reflection in the mirror, a 57-year-old black woman who looked like she should be teaching Sunday school. Looked, that is, like someone who could be underestimated. She smiled, and went to war. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread, apparently, about the emergency hearing. The gallery held at least 30 people. Reporters, spectators, a few faces Nadine recognized from the previous day's hearings. Dorothy Stokes sat in the front row, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. Hensley and his team were already in position, smug and confident in their matching suits. Merriweather sat at her desk, deliberately avoiding Nadine's eyes. Deputy Kellner stood by the bench, hand resting near his belt, watching Nadine with undisguised hostility. And Jernigan was there too. Not at his security post, in the gallery, in civilian clothes, sitting directly behind the petitioner's table, close enough to be a threat, far enough to claim coincidence. Nadine took her place at the respondent's table, arranged her documents with deliberate care, waited. At 9:05, the side door opened. "All rise." Harlan entered with the same proprietary stride she'd observed yesterday. Same rumpled robe, same coffee mug, same expression of barely concealed contempt. But today, there was something else in his eyes, something that looked almost like anticipation. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and smiled. "Good morning." "Good. In the matter of Northland Development Corporation versus the estate of Nadine Achebe, we're here on an emergency motion filed by the petitioner to expedite judgment. Mr. Hensley, you may proceed." Hensley rose with theatrical gravity. "Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioner respectfully requests that this court grant immediate judgment in the quiet title action, based on the respondent's pattern of dilatory tactics and frivolous challenges to a lawfully executed deed." "Objection." Nadine was on her feet before Hensley finished his sentence. "The respondent has not engaged in dilatory tactics. The respondent filed timely responsive pleadings, subpoenaed relevant documents, and was prepared to present evidence at the hearing scheduled for yesterday, a hearing that the court continued over the respondent's objection." Harlan's smile didn't waver. "Ms. Achebe, this is Mr. Hensley's motion. You'll have your opportunity to respond." "With respect, Your Honor, the characterization of my conduct as dilatory is defamatory and should not be entered into the record without rebuttal." "Sit down, Ms. Achebe." She didn't sit. "Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect that the respondent is being denied the opportunity to respond to false characterizations of her conduct." Harlan's face darkened. "I said sit down. And I said I'd like the record to reflect—" "Bailiff!" Deputy Kellner moved before Nadine could finish her sentence. 2 steps across the courtroom, a hand on her shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. Now." Nadine looked at him, at the hand on her shoulder, at the pressure that was just short of painful, just short of what could be called assault. "Deputy, remove your hand from my person. Sit down, and I will." She sat, not because of his threat, because she needed the moment to play out, needed the gallery to see, needed the record to reflect. Kellner released her shoulder, stepped back. But his position had shifted. Now he stood directly behind her chair, close enough to intervene again if she moved. "Intimidation tactics, in open court, on the record." Harlan nodded as if this was perfectly normal. "Continue, Mr. Hensley." Hensley had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, probably because he was an attorney who understood that what just happened was a reversible error waiting to be appealed. But he recovered quickly. "As I was saying, Your Honor, the petitioner has a lawfully executed deed, properly notarized, showing clear transfer of the property. The respondent's claims of fraud are unsubstantiated. Her so-called evidence consists of speculation and conspiracy theories. The court should not allow this matter to continue dragging on while my client's development plans are delayed." "Thank you, Mr. Hensley." Harlan turned to Nadine. "Miss Achebe, you may respond. You may—" "Briefly." Nadine stood. Kellner's presence behind her was like heat from a fire, impossible to ignore, impossible to address without escalating. "Your Honor, I have evidence that the deed in question is fraudulent. Specifically, I have documentation from the Minnesota Secretary of State's office showing that the notary who allegedly authenticated the deed, Gerald Simmons, was incapacitated by a stroke in 2021 and was living in a nursing home at the time the deed was purportedly executed." Hensley half rose from his seat. "Objection. This evidence wasn't disclosed." It was disclosed, Your Honor. I filed subpoenas for these records on March 28th. The subpoenas were served on the Secretary of State's office and on opposing counsel. I have certified mail receipts showing delivery. Your Honor, we never received— I have copies for the court. Nadine lifted a stack of documents. I'd like to approach. Harlan's smile had frozen. His eyes flicked to Merriweather, who was studying her desk with intense focus. The court will review the documents from where you're standing. Your Honor, the documents are 27 pages. I respectfully request permission to approach so the court can examine them properly. Permission denied. Summarize your evidence. Nadine held the documents up so the gallery could see them. Let the cameras in the audience capture the moment. These records show that Gerald Simmons suffered a debilitating stroke in May of 2021. He was admitted to Sunrise Senior Care in July of that year and remained there until his death in January of this year. During that period, his notary stamp was used to authenticate over 40 property transactions, including the deed on my aunt's house, which is dated October 15th of last year. She paused. Let the number sink in. More significantly, Your Honor, the records show that Gerald Simmons's stamp was used to authenticate 2 property transactions on January 19th of this year. Another pause. Gerald Simmons died on January 15th. The courtroom erupted. Whispers, gasps. Someone in the gallery saying, "Oh my God." Harlan's gavel came down like a shotgun blast. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. The noise subsided, but the energy remained. Electric, charged, waiting. Ms. Achebe. Harlan's voice was ice. These are serious allegations. If you're claiming that someone committed fraud using a deceased notary's credentials— I'm not claiming it, Your Honor. I'm documenting it, with certified records from a state agency. The documents speak for themselves. The documents are unauthenticated hearsay. With respect, Your Honor, certified copies of public records are explicitly exempted from the hearsay rule under Minnesota Rule of Evidence 803, Subdivision 8. I'm happy to cite the case law if the court requires. Harlan's jaw worked. His fingers gripped the edge of the bench. This hearing is in recess. The words came out strangled. 15 minutes. The gavel crashed down. Harlan disappeared through the side door before anyone could react. The recess stretched to 30 minutes, then 45. Nadine remained at the respondent's table, surrounded by her documents, watching the door through which Harlan had vanished. Kellner had moved to a position near the bench, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her with undisguised hostility. Jernigan had shifted to a seat closer to the exit, ready to block her path if she tried to leave, or ready to intercept her after she left. The distinction might matter very soon. Hensley and his team were huddled in whispered conference, their earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like damage control. Every few minutes, one of them would glance at Nadine, then quickly look away. At 9:52, the side door opened. But it wasn't Harlan who emerged. It was a woman, late 50s, gray suit, reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She walked to the bench, didn't sit in the judge's chair, just stood behind it with an authority that needed no elevation. "Good morning," her voice carried easily in the sudden silence. "I'm Judge Patricia Hammond, Chief Judge of the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Judge Harlan has recused himself from this matter. I'll be presiding for the remainder of these proceedings." The gallery buzzed. Hensley's face went pale. Nadine remained seated, but her heart was pounding. Recusal. Harlan had recused himself. That wasn't supposed to happen. Not without a motion. Not without grounds stated on the record. Unless someone had forced it. Unless the evidence she'd presented had triggered something beyond this courtroom. Judge Hammond settled into the chair, adjusted the microphone. "Ms. Achebe, I've reviewed the documents you submitted during the recess. They've been forwarded to my chambers by the court clerk." Her eyes met Nadine's. "They're quite compelling." "Thank you, Your Honor." However, compelling evidence doesn't resolve a case. It begins an investigation. Hammond turned to Hensley. "Mr. Hensley, your client's emergency motion is denied. This matter requires proper evidentiary proceedings, and those proceedings will be scheduled for, she checked her calendar, 3 weeks from today. In the meantime, I'm ordering the petitioner to preserve all documents related to the acquisition of the River Road property, including but not limited to communications with the notary Gerald Simmons, communications with any representatives of the Achebe family, and any financial records related to the transaction. Your Honor, Hensley started. Furthermore, I'm referring the matter of the potentially fraudulent notarizations to the Minnesota Attorney General's office for investigation. The death certificate discrepancy raised by Ms. Achebe is a matter of criminal concern that exceeds this court's jurisdiction. Your Honor, that's my ruling, Mr. Hensley. Hammond's voice left no room for argument. Your client can comply with the document preservation order, or your client can explain to the AG's office why they didn't. She turned to Nadine. Ms. Achebe, you've done excellent work here today. I'd encourage you to consider retaining counsel for the remaining proceedings, not because you need one, but because the opposing side clearly does. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the gallery. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The hallway outside room 204 was chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Spectators pressed forward. Dorothy Stokes was crying and laughing simultaneously, grabbing Nadine's hands and saying, "You did it! You did it!" over and over. Nadine kept moving, through the crowd, toward the stairs, toward the exit. She was halfway down the first flight when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, fast, gaining. She didn't turn, didn't run, just kept walking, steady and controlled. A hand grabbed her arm, spun her around. Jernigan. His face was red, his breathing heavy, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You think you won something in there?" "Let go of my arm. You just destroyed a good man's career, a man who served this community for 22 years. "I said let go of my arm." His grip tightened. "You people always think you can come in here and— Security!" The shout came from behind them. A court officer, not Kellner, someone Nadine didn't recognize, was running down the stairs. "Sir, release that woman immediately." Jernigan's face twisted. For a moment, his grip tightened further, tight enough that Nadine felt the bones in her arm compress, tight enough to leave marks. Then he let go, stepped back, raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just having a conversation," he said. "No harm done." The court officer positioned himself between them. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Nadine rubbed her arm. The fingerprints were already visible, red marks that would turn to bruises by evening. "I'm fine, but I'd like this incident documented." "Yes, ma'am, I'll need a statement." She looked at Jernigan, at his raised hands and innocent expression, at the rage still burning behind his eyes. "I'll provide one," she said, "along with photographs of the marks on my arm." She continued down the stairs, out the front doors, into the April sunshine. Behind her, Jernigan's voice carried through the marble lobby. "This isn't over." He was right about that. Nadine drove to Eugenia's house without stopping, checking her mirrors every 30 seconds for followers. No one seemed to be tailing her, but after the morning's events, she wasn't taking chances. Inside, she locked every door, checked every window, and finally allowed herself to sit at the kitchen table and breathe. Her phone buzzed. Agent Webb. That was impressive. "You were watching?" "We had someone in the gallery. The recusal happened faster than we expected." "What triggered it?" "Hammond got a call about 40 minutes into the recess, from the Judicial Conduct Committee. Someone, I don't know who, filed an emergency complaint about Harlan's behavior in the hearing. The threat in chambers yesterday, the physical intimidation by his bailiff, the lost subpoenas." A pause. "And some additional information that suggested the committee should act immediately." Nadine closed her eyes. "Additional information." "About patterns. About connections. About a federal investigation that would become public very soon." She understood. The committee had known about her evaluation, had been waiting for her signal, and when the evidence reached a critical mass, they'd moved. What happens to Harlan now? Suspension pending investigation. His cases are being reassigned. His chambers are being searched. Webb's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. He's done, Justice Achebe, and thanks to your documentation, he's not going to be the only one. Northland? The AG's office is coordinating with us. Warrants are being prepared as we speak. Nadine looked out the window at the Mississippi, flowing past like it had for 10,000 years, carrying water toward the Gulf, carrying justice, slowly, toward the sea. Agent Webb, this morning Jernigan, the courthouse security guard, grabbed me in the stairwell, left bruises on my arm. Are you injured? Nothing serious, but it's documented. Court officer witnessed it. We'll add it to the file. A pause. Justice Achebe, the next few weeks are going to be complicated. Northland has resources. They have lawyers. They're going to fight this with everything they have. I expected that. And at some point your real identity is going to come out. The media will figure it out, or Northland's lawyers will. And when they do, I'll deal with it. Just be prepared. This story isn't over. It's barely begun. He hung up. Nadine sat in Eugenia's kitchen, surrounded by documents and evidence and the weight of everything she'd uncovered. 5 generations of history on the walls. Photographs of grandmothers and great-grandmothers who'd survived worse than this. Who'd built something that lasted. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her clerk in Washington. Committee received your report. Formal investigation authorized. Be safe. She smiled. The first genuine smile in days. Then her doorbell rang. Through the window beside the door, Nadine could see a woman on the porch. Black, mid-30s, professional attire, briefcase in hand. Not a threat. Probably. She opened the door. Ms. Achebe? I'm Special Agent Tamara Reeves, FBI Minneapolis. May I come in? Another agent. Different from Webb. Nadine's instincts prickled. Agent Webb didn't mention a partner. I'm not his partner. I'm from a different unit. Reeves pulled out credentials, held them up for inspection. Financial crimes. We've been building a parallel investigation into Northland for 18 months. Separate from Agent Webb's work. Why separate? Because we suspected there might be federal involvement in the conspiracy. We couldn't risk exposure. Nadine's blood chilled. Federal involvement. May I come in? She stepped aside. Let Reeves enter. Close the door. Reeves surveyed the room with professional assessment. The documents on the table, the security setup, the photographs on the walls. You've been busy. I've been thorough. So I've heard. Reeves set her briefcase on the table, opened it, pulled out a photograph, slid it across the surface. Nadine looked at it. A surveillance photo. 2 men in suits shaking hands outside a restaurant. One of them was Hensley, Northland's lawyer. The other was younger, federal haircut, federal posture. Who is this? Assistant U.S. Attorney Victor Stanton, Minneapolis office. Reeves's voice was flat. He's been feeding information to Northland for at least 2 years, tipping them off about investigations, helping them clean up evidence before warrants could be executed, making sure their quiet title actions went smoothly. Nadine stared at the photograph. A federal prosecutor, corrupt, working with the same people who'd stolen her aunt's house. Webb doesn't know? Webb's investigation didn't touch the U.S. Attorney's office. We had to keep it compartmentalized. Reeves pulled out another photograph. There's more. This one showed Stanton with someone else, someone Nadine recognized immediately. Her hand went to her chest, her heart hammered. That's... Yes. Reeves met her eyes. Justice Achebe, I'm afraid this conspiracy reaches higher than any of us realized, and we need your help to bring it down. Nadine looked at the photograph, at the face of the man standing beside Victor Stanton, a face she knew well, a face she'd seen in chambers, in meetings, in the highest court in the land. This wasn't just about her aunt's house anymore. This wasn't just about Northland Development or Judge Harlan or a dozen stolen properties. This was about the federal judiciary itself, and she was standing in the middle of it. The photograph showed Judge Raymond Castellano, 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, 17 years on the federal bench, currently on the short list for the next Supreme Court vacancy. Nadine's hand trembled slightly as she set the photograph down. "How long have you known about this?" "6 months." Reeves pulled out more documents from her briefcase. Castellano has been receiving payments through a series of shell companies traced back to Northland's parent corporation. Small amounts, $50,000 here, $75,000 there, routed through offshore accounts in the Caymans. That's bribery of a federal judge. That's the tip of the iceberg. Reeves spread the documents across Eugenia's kitchen table. Financial records, wire transfers, property deeds, a web of corruption that stretched from a small Minnesota courthouse to the highest levels of the federal judiciary. Castellano has ruled in Northland's favor in 3 separate appeals over the past 4 years. Each ruling was worth millions to the company. Each ruling contradicted the weight of evidence. Nadine studied the documents. Her legal mind processed the implications automatically, the statutes violated, the charges that could be filed, the constitutional crisis that would erupt when this became public. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" "Because you're already in the middle of it." Reeves met her eyes. "And because we need someone with your expertise to help us build the case. Someone who understands how federal judges think. Someone who can anticipate Castellano's next moves." "You want me to be a consultant?" "I want you to be a witness, eventually." Reeves paused. "But first, I need to know something. The Judicial Conduct Committee authorized an investigation into Harlan this morning. Someone filed an emergency complaint, someone with access to information that wasn't public yet." Nadine said nothing. "Justice Achebe, I know who you are. I've known since you arrived in Stillwater." The kitchen went silent. Outside, the Mississippi flowed past, indifferent to the secrets being exchanged within these walls. "How?" "Your clerk in Washington made inquiries through channels that we monitor, the Secretary of State's records, the FBI background check system." Reeves's voice was matter-of-fact. "We've been waiting to see what you'd do, whether you'd use your position to influence the case, or whether you'd play it straight." "And your conclusion?" "You played it straight. You documented everything. You followed procedure. You let the evidence speak for itself." A hint of respect entered Reeves's tone. "That's why I'm here. Because we need someone who understands that justice has to be done the right way, even when the wrong way would be faster." Nadine looked at the documents on the table, at the photograph of Castellano shaking hands with a corrupt prosecutor, at the web of financial transactions that connected a riverfront property in Minnesota to the federal appeals court. "What do you need from me?" "Testimony, when the time comes." Reeves began gathering the documents. "And in the meantime, I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, fighting for your aunt's house, documenting the corruption, building the record." "And if Northland figures out who I am?" "Then we accelerate the timeline." Reeves closed her briefcase. "But until then, you're Nadine Achebe, grieving niece, pro se litigant, nothing more." She stood, walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. "One more thing. Victor Stanton, the corrupt AUSA. He's been asking questions about you, running background checks, looking for leverage." Nadine's stomach tightened. "He knows. He suspects. There's a difference." Reeves opened the door. "Be careful, Justice Achebe. The next few days are going to be dangerous." She left without waiting for a response. Nadine stood alone in Eugenia's kitchen, surrounded by the weight of everything she'd learned. A corrupt federal judge, a compromised prosecutor, a conspiracy that reached from this small Minnesota town to the steps of the Supreme Court, and she was the only one who could bring it all down. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Nadine worked 18-hour shifts at Eugenia's kitchen table, organizing evidence, drafting legal briefs, coordinating with Agent Reeves through encrypted messages. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been building their case for 18 months, but Nadine's documentation from inside Harlan's courtroom provided something they'd lacked: proof of how the conspiracy operated at the ground level. The forged deeds were the foundation. Gerald Simmons's notary stamp, used after his death, connected 12 properties to Northland Development. But the pattern went deeper. Every one of those properties had been the subject of a quiet title action in Harlan's courtroom. Everyone had been decided in Northland's favor. Everyone had involved a pro se litigant, someone without a lawyer, without resources, without the knowledge to fight back. Dorothy Stokes's case file proved particularly valuable. She'd kept everything, every filing, every ruling, every communication with the court clerk's office. Her records showed that Sutton Merriweather had lost her documents 3 separate times, each loss coinciding with a deadline that Dorothy missed as a result. "She did the same thing to me," Nadine told Reeves during their second meeting. "The subpoenas I filed on March 28th. Merriweather claimed they were never received, but I have certified mail receipts showing delivery." "We know. We've been monitoring Merriweather's communications for 6 months." Reeves pulled up a series of emails on her laptop. "She's been forwarding filing information to Hensley's office before it reaches Harlan, giving Northland advance warning of every challenge, every piece of evidence, every legal strategy. That's conspiracy to obstruct justice. That's one of 14 charges we're preparing." Reeves scrolled through the email chain. "But here's where it gets interesting. Look at this message from 3 weeks ago." Nadine read the email. From Merriweather to Hensley. Subject line: Achebe matter, urgent. New respondent in the Eugenia Achebe case. Niece from out of state. Something's off about her. She knows too much. Recommend enhanced due diligence. "Enhanced due diligence," Nadine repeated. "Northland's code for background investigation. They've been running searches on you for 3 weeks. Reeves's expression was grim. "So far they've found what you wanted them to find. A niece from Michigan, law school graduate, no current practice. But they're digging deeper." "How deep?" "Deep enough that Victor Stanton got involved." Reeves pulled up another document. "He ran your name through federal databases 2 days ago, looking for any connection to law enforcement, intelligence agencies, or, notably, the federal judiciary." Nadine's pulse quickened. "Did he find anything?" "The search flagged your security clearance. Supreme Court personnel files are classified, but the existence of a clearance isn't." Reeves met her eyes. "He knows you're connected to the federal government somehow. He just doesn't know how." "How long before he figures it out?" "Days? Maybe hours." Reeves closed her laptop. "Which is why we need to move faster than we planned." Hug. If you're invested in this story, hit subscribe now. You won't believe what happens when the truth comes out. The accelerated timeline meant taking risks. Nadine spent the next morning at the Washington County Recorder's Office, requesting copies of every property transaction involving Northland Development or its subsidiaries for the past 5 years. The clerk, a young white woman who seemed genuinely helpful, printed out 147 documents without asking why someone wanted them. The pattern was even clearer in bulk. 43 properties acquired through quitclaim deeds, 31 of those deeds notarized by Gerald Simmons, 22 of the transactions occurring after his stroke in 2021, 4 occurring after his death. Nadine photographed every document, made copies, built a timeline that showed the conspiracy's growth, starting small in 2019, expanding rapidly in 2021, reaching a fever pitch in the months before Simmons died. She was leaving the recorder's office when she noticed the black pickup truck parked across the street. Jernigan. He sat in the driver's seat, watching her through the windshield, making no effort to hide, wanting her to know she was being followed. Nadine walked to her rental car without hurrying, unlocked it, got inside, started the engine. The pickup pulled out behind her. She drove toward Eugenia's house, taking the scenic route along the river, watching her mirrors. Jernigan followed at a distance, close enough to be visible, far enough to claim coincidence. Classic intimidation. Amateur hour. But when she turned onto River Road, the pickup didn't follow. It continued straight, disappearing around the bend. Strange. Unless he'd already accomplished his goal, letting her know she was being watched, or unless someone else was waiting. She approached Eugenia's house slowly, scanning the property. The driveway was empty, the windows dark. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. But something felt wrong. She parked at the end of the driveway. Didn't get out immediately. Just sat there, watching, waiting for her instincts to tell her what her eyes couldn't see. Then she noticed it. The front door. The deadbolt she'd installed 2 days ago. It was unlocked. She could tell by the position of the keyhole. Horizontal instead of vertical. Someone had been inside. Nadine pulled out her phone. Texted Reeves. House compromised. Need backup. The response came in seconds. Stay in your vehicle. Agents en route. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. An eternity when you didn't know who was waiting inside your home. She sat in the car, engine running, eyes fixed on the front door, counted the seconds, watched for movement in the windows. At the 3-minute mark, the front door opened. Deputy Kellner stepped onto the porch. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, work boots, but the badge on his belt was visible, and the weapon in his hand was unmistakable. Ms. Achebe, his voice carried across the yard. Why don't you step out of the vehicle? Nadine didn't move, didn't respond, just watched him through the windshield, calculating distances and options. I know you're not going to run. Kellner descended the porch steps, weapon still in hand. That would be fleeing from a law enforcement officer. That's a felony in Minnesota. You're not in uniform. You're not on duty. You're trespassing on my property. Nadine's voice was steady, projecting through the open car window. Put the weapon away and leave, or I'm calling 911. Go ahead. Call. Kellner smiled. By the time they get here, we'll have had our conversation. He was 20 feet from the car now, close enough that she could see the cold certainty in his eyes. Close enough that running wasn't an option. She thought about the documents in her bag, the evidence she'd gathered that morning, if Kellner got his hands on them. What do you want? Just a conversation. He stopped 10 feet away. The weapon hadn't moved, held low, pointed at the ground but ready. About what you think you know, about what you think you're going to do with that information. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Kellner's smile widened. You've been gathering documents, making copies, building a case. He paused. We know, Ms. Achebe. We've known since you started. Nadine's mind raced. They'd been watching her, monitoring her movements. Probably had someone at the recorder's office who'd reported her request. If you know what I've found, then you know it's already too late. She kept her voice level. The evidence is documented. Multiple copies exist. Whatever you do to me, the case survives. Maybe. Kellner took another step forward. But cases need witnesses, and witnesses can be discouraged. The sound of tires on gravel made them both turn. 2 black SUVs were pulling onto River Road, moving fast. Federal plates. Kellner's expression shifted. Calculation. Reassessment. Decision. He holstered his weapon, raised his hand slightly, took 3 steps back from the car. We'll continue this conversation later, Ms. Achebe. He walked to a vehicle parked behind the house, a sedan she hadn't noticed, and drove away before the SUVs reached the driveway. Agent Reeves was out of the first vehicle before it stopped moving. Are you hurt? No. Nadine's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her. But he was inside the house, and he was armed. Reeves signaled to the other agents. 2 of them moved toward the house, weapons drawn. 2 more secured the perimeter. What did he want? To intimidate me, to find out what I know. Nadine took a breath. And to see if I could be scared off. Can you? Nadine looked at the house where 5 generations of her family had lived, at the roses Eugenia had planted 30 years ago, at the porch where she'd learned to play cards and sing hymns and believe in justice. No. The FBI agents swept the house, found no one else inside, but they found evidence of the search. Drawers opened, papers moved, a laptop that had been accessed, unsuccessfully thanks to encryption. Kellner had been looking for something specific, probably the same documents Nadine had been gathering. "He's panicking," Reeves said as they stood in the kitchen, surveying the damage. "They all are. Harlan's recusal triggered a chain reaction. Northland knows the investigation is accelerating." And Kellner decided to take matters into his own hands. Kellner decided to prove his loyalty. Reeves's voice was grim. "He's in deep with Northland. Has been for years. We have financial records showing payments to an account in his wife's maiden name. So arrest him." "We will. Soon." Reeves checked her phone. "But right now, arresting him tips off everyone else. We need to take them all at once, or the bigger fish escape." Nadine understood the logic. She hated it, but she understood it. "How much longer?" "The grand jury convenes in 4 days. We present evidence. They issue indictments. Federal marshals execute arrests simultaneously across 3 states. Reeves met her eyes. "Can you stay safe for 4 more days?" Nadine looked around Eugenia's kitchen, the house that had survived everything, Jim Crow, the Depression, the Civil Rights era. The house that was still standing, still fighting, still hers. "I can stay safe." "Good." Reeves headed for the door. "Because after the indictments come down, everything changes, and you're going to be at the center of it." Dumb. The next 4 days tested every ounce of Nadine's patience and discipline. She documented everything, photographed the evidence of Kellner's search, recorded timestamps on her security system showing when the door was breached, created backup copies of all her files and stored them in 3 separate locations: a safe deposit box in Minneapolis, an encrypted cloud server, and a sealed envelope with her clerk in Washington. She also prepared for the hearing scheduled with Judge Hammond. The quiet title action was still pending, the emergency motion denied, but the underlying case unresolved. Hensley would try again. Different approach, same goal, taking her aunt's house through legal manipulation. But the real preparation was mental, steeling herself for what was coming. The reveal, the exposure, the moment when Nadine Achebe, grieving niece, became Justice Nadine Achebe, Supreme Court. She'd known from the beginning that her identity would eventually surface, had accepted it as the price of doing what needed to be done. But accepting something in the abstract was different from facing it in reality. Her reputation, her career, her carefully maintained separation between personal and professional. All of it would be questioned, analyzed, criticized. Had she overstepped her authority, used her position improperly, compromised the integrity of the federal judiciary by involving herself in a state court matter? The legal answers were clear. She'd acted as a private citizen, representing herself in a matter involving her own property. The Judicial Conduct Committee evaluation was separate, authorized through proper channels, documented according to protocol. She hadn't used her Supreme Court position to influence the state court proceedings. But legal answers and public perception were different things. The media would have questions. Her colleagues would have opinions. The political ramifications would be unpredictable. She was ready for all of it. Eugenia's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes you have to dig the channel yourself." She was digging, and the channel was almost complete. On the 3rd day, Dorothy Stokes came to visit. The older woman arrived at Eugenia's house with a casserole dish and tears in her eyes. She'd heard about Harlan's recusal, heard about the investigation, heard that someone was finally fighting back. "I never thought I'd see this day." Dorothy sat at Eugenia's kitchen table, the same table where Nadine had been building her case for a week. 23 years on that bench. 23 years of people like me losing everything. And now... "It's not over yet," Nadine cautioned. "The investigation is ongoing. Indictments haven't been issued. Harlan hasn't been charged with anything." But he's gone. That's something. Dorothy reached across the table, took Nadine's hand. You did something nobody else could do. You stood up to them, in their own courtroom, with their own rules. I had evidence they didn't expect. You had courage. Dorothy's grip tightened. I've been watching that courtroom for 2 years, watching people get destroyed, watching families lose everything, and nobody ever fought back the way you did. Nadine thought about all the people she hadn't helped, all the Dorothy Stokeses who'd lost their cases before she arrived, all the families whose homes were already gone, transferred to Northland through forged deeds and corrupted proceedings. It should have happened sooner. It's happening now. That's what matters. Dorothy released her hand, wiped her eyes. Ms. Achebe, I don't know who you really are. I don't know why you know so much about the law or why you're so calm when everyone else would be terrified. But I know you're not just some niece from out of state. Nadine said nothing. You don't have to tell me. That's your business. Dorothy stood, gathered her purse. But whoever you are, whatever happens next, thank you. For my house, for all the houses, for finally making them answer. She left the casserole on the counter and walked out into the April afternoon. Nadine sat alone at the table, Dorothy's words echoing in the silence. Whoever you are, whatever happens next, tomorrow, everyone would know. The 4th day arrived gray and cold, the April warmth replaced by a late-season chill that felt like winter refusing to surrender. Nadine dressed carefully, not the cardigan and sensible shoes of the past week, but a dark suit, professional and authoritative. The clothes of someone who belonged in a courtroom, the clothes of someone who was about to change everything. Her phone buzzed at 7 a.m. Agent Reeves. Grand jury returned indictments, 15 counts, 12 defendants. Nadine's heart hammered. Who? Hensley, Merriweather, Kellner, Jernigan. 3 Northland executives. 2 notaries who took over after Simmons died. Victor Stanton. A pause. And Harlan. Federal charges? Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations under color of law. Reeves's voice carried grim satisfaction. Castellano is a separate matter. His indictment is sealed pending additional investigation. But the rest of them are going down today. When do arrests happen? Simultaneous. 9 a.m. Federal marshals are already in position. Another pause. Justice Achebe, there's something else. Hensley's office filed an emergency motion last night. They're asking Hammond to dismiss your case entirely, claiming you obtained evidence through improper means. What improper means? They're alleging you had access to sealed federal investigation materials, that you coordinated with the FBI to manufacture evidence against their client. Nadine's jaw tightened. That's absurd. It's a Hail Mary. They know what's coming. They're trying to muddy the waters, create doubt, give Northland some kind of defense. Reeves's voice hardened. The motion hearing is at 10 a.m. Judge Hammond's courtroom. I'll be there. So will we. This is the moment everything changes. Subscribe now so you don't miss the satisfying conclusion. The Washington County Courthouse was surrounded. Nadine saw the federal vehicles as she approached. Black SUVs positioned at every entrance, marshals in tactical gear moving with coordinated purpose. The arrests were happening. Right now. While she walked up the same steps where Jernigan had confronted her a week ago. Inside, the security checkpoint was chaos. Jernigan wasn't there, probably already in handcuffs somewhere. A young marshal had taken his place, checking IDs with professional efficiency, while spectators and reporters crowded the lobby. Word had spread. The media had arrived. Nadine moved through the checkpoint, collected her bag, and headed for the stairs. Room 204, 10 a.m., the motion hearing that would decide whether her case survived and whether her identity remained secret. She was halfway up the first flight when she heard the commotion below. Shouting, the sound of handcuffs clicking. A woman's voice. Merriweather, Nadine realized, protesting that there must be some mistake, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that they were making a terrible error. The arrests had reached the courthouse. Nadine continued climbing. Past the second floor. Past the offices where Harlan had threatened her. Past the hallway where Jernigan had grabbed her arm. Room 204 was already filling when she arrived. Reporters occupied the back rows, notebooks and phones ready. Dorothy Stokes sat in the front row, wearing her best Sunday dress. And at the petitioner's table, Brock Hensley sat alone. His colleagues were gone. His confidence was gone. The silver hair that had seemed distinguished now looked merely gray, and the tan that had suggested vitality now suggested too many hours in a tanning bed. He looked like what he was, a man whose world was collapsing. Nadine took her place at the respondent's table, arranged her documents, waited. At 10:03, the side door opened. "All rise." Judge Hammond entered with the same composed authority Nadine had observed at their first encounter. But there was something different in her expression today, a weight, a gravity, that suggested she knew more than the official proceedings would reveal. "Good morning." Hammond settled into her chair, surveyed the courtroom. Her eyes lingered on Hensley, then moved to Nadine. "We're here on an emergency motion filed by the petitioner to dismiss the case of Northland Development Corporation versus the estate of Eugenia Achebe. Mr. Hensley, I've reviewed your filing. Before you argue, I want to be clear. This court is aware that federal arrests are currently being executed related to the matters before us. Do you wish to proceed?" Hensley stood. His hands were shaking slightly. "Your Honor, my client." "Your client's executives were arrested 40 minutes ago on federal conspiracy charges." Hammond's voice was level but firm. "Your office manager was arrested as well, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has informed me that additional charges may be forthcoming against individuals connected to this litigation." The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. "Under these circumstances, Mr. Hensley, I'm giving you one opportunity to withdraw your motion. If you proceed, I will require you to substantiate every allegation you've made, including the allegation that the respondent improperly obtained federal investigation materials." Hensley's face had gone pale. He looked at Nadine, at the reporters, at the judge who was offering him a way out. "Your Honor, the petitioner withdraws its emergency motion." "So noted." Hammond made a notation. "Mr. Hensley, given the circumstances, does Northland Development wish to continue its quiet title action?" A long pause. Hensley consulted his phone, probably receiving instructions from whoever was left at Northland to give them. His expression grew more strained with each passing second. "Your Honor, the petitioner requests a 60-day continuance to assess its legal position." "Objection." Nadine rose from her seat. "The respondent has been defending against this frivolous action for 5 weeks. The petitioner has already received one continuance. Further delay prejudices the respondent's rights to the property at issue." Hammond nodded slowly. "Ms. Achebe makes a valid point, Mr. Hensley. Your client initiated this action claiming a valid deed. Recent evidence suggests that deed may have been obtained through fraud. I'm not inclined to give Northland more time to construct defenses to criminal charges while the respondent's property rights remain in limbo." "Your Honor, please. Motion for continuance is denied." Hammond's gavel came down once. "This matter will proceed to evidentiary hearing in 7 days. At that hearing, the petitioner will be required to authenticate the deed at issue, including providing testimony from the notary who witnessed it." "Your Honor, the notary is deceased." "Then the petitioner will need to find alternative means of authentication." Hammond's expression suggested she knew exactly how impossible that would be. "In the meantime, I'm issuing a preliminary injunction preventing any transfer, encumbrance, or development of the River Road property pending resolution of this action." "Your Honor, the injunction is effective immediately." Another gavel strike. "Is there anything else, Mr. Hensley?" Hensley stood frozen. The fight had gone out of him. Whatever resources Northland might have marshaled, Whatever strategies they might have employed had evaporated with the morning's arrests. No, Your Honor. Very well. Hammond turned to Nadine. Ms. Achebe, do you have anything to add? Nadine stood. Yes, Your Honor. In light of the federal investigation and the evidence of fraud that has emerged, the respondent requests that the court take judicial notice of the following facts. First, that the notary whose stamp appears on the deed in question, Gerald Simmons, was incapacitated by stroke from May 2021 until his death in January of this year. Second, that Mr. Simmons's notary stamp was used to authenticate documents after his death. And third, that this court's records show a pattern of procedural irregularities in cases involving Northland Development and the previous presiding judge. Hammond's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Those are serious allegations, Ms. Achebe. They're documented allegations, Your Honor. I have certified records from the Minnesota Secretary of State, the Washington County Recorder's Office, and this court's own filing system. Nadine pulled a thick folder from her bag. I'm prepared to submit this documentation for the court's review. The court will accept the submission. Hammond gestured to her clerk, a young man Nadine didn't recognize, clearly brought in after Merriweather's arrest. Additionally, Ms. Achebe, I've been informed that the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee has authorized a formal investigation into matters related to this case. Do you have any information about that investigation? The courtroom went silent. Reporters leaned forward. Hensley's head snapped up. This was the moment. The reveal. The point of no return. Nadine took a breath. Your Honor, I do have information about that investigation, and in the interest of full disclosure, I believe the court and the parties are entitled to know my connection to it. She reached into her bag, pulled out a leather credential case, opened it slowly. My name is Nadine Achebe. I am an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. I came to Minnesota 3 weeks ago to settle my aunt's estate and to conduct an authorized evaluation of judicial conduct in this courthouse on behalf of the Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee. The courtroom erupted. The next 3 hours were chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Hensley demanded a mistrial, or whatever the probate equivalent was. The clerk scrambled to restore order while Judge Hammond pounded her gavel repeatedly. But through all of it, Nadine remained calm. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, and now that it was here, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. No more pretending, no more hiding. She was who she was, and the truth was finally out. Judge Hammond eventually cleared the courtroom, ordering a 30-minute recess while she conferred with the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court via telephone. The legal implications of a sitting U.S. Supreme Court justice appearing as a litigant in state court were unprecedented, but not, Nadine knew, improper. She'd checked the rules before she came. A justice could own property, could defend that property in court, could represent herself in civil matters unrelated to her federal duties. Nothing in the Code of Judicial Conduct prohibited it, but propriety and rules were different things, and the appearance of impropriety could be as damaging as actual misconduct. When court resumed, Hammond's expression was grave but not hostile. Justice Achebe, I've consulted with Chief Justice Bergstrom and with representatives of the Federal Judicial Conduct Committee. All parties agree that your presence in this case, while unusual, does not violate any applicable rules or statutes. Hammond paused. However, given the extraordinary circumstances, Chief Justice Bergstrom has asked me to inquire whether you wish to withdraw from this matter and have it handled by appointed counsel. Nadine stood. No, Your Honor, I began this case representing myself, and I intend to finish it the same way. My aunt's house is my personal property. My right to defend it doesn't diminish because of my professional position. Hammond nodded slowly. Very well. The case will proceed as scheduled. But I want to be clear, Justice Achebe. Any ruling I make will be based solely on the evidence presented, without regard to your federal position. If you lose this case, you lose it on the merits. I wouldn't expect anything else, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned until next week. Hammond rose. And Justice Achebe, off the record, I'm sorry about your aunt. Eugenia was a good woman. She deserved better than what happened to her estate. The words caught Nadine off guard. She hadn't expected sympathy, hadn't expected recognition of the human cost beneath all the legal maneuvering. Thank you, Your Honor. Hammond nodded once and disappeared through the side door. The courthouse steps were a media circus. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Microphones were thrust toward Nadine from every direction as she emerged into the April afternoon. Justice Achebe, why did you hide your identity? Did the Supreme Court authorize this investigation? Is this a conflict of interest? Are you trying to influence local courts? She stopped at the top of the steps, raised her hand, waited for the noise to subside. I'll make a brief statement, and then I'll take no questions. The crowd quieted. Cameras focused. My aunt, Eugenia Achebe, lived in this community for 81 years. When she died, a company called Northland Development produced a deed claiming she had sold her home, a home that had been in my family for 5 generations, for $18,000. That deed was fraudulent. The signature was forged. The notarization was performed by someone using a dead man's credentials. She paused. Let the words sink in. I came to Minnesota to protect my family's property. In the course of that effort, I discovered a pattern of judicial misconduct that had victimized dozens of families over more than a decade. I documented that misconduct and reported it through proper channels. Today, federal authorities have arrested 12 individuals in connection with this conspiracy. More arrests may follow. Another pause. I am a justice of the Supreme Court. I am also a black woman who grew up in a family that taught me the value of property, the importance of legacy, and the necessity of fighting for justice, even when the system is rigged against you. Today, I'm both of those things, and I'm not ashamed of either one. She turned and walked down the steps, through the crowd, to the rental car she'd parked 3 blocks away. The reporters followed for half a block, then gave up. She drove to Eugenia's house, parked in the driveway, walked inside and locked the door. Then, finally, alone in the kitchen where 5 generations of her family had shared meals and memories and hope, she allowed herself to cry. The evidentiary hearing, 1 week later, was almost anticlimactic. Northland Development had no defense. Their executives were in federal custody, their lawyers scrambling to negotiate plea deals, their documents seized by FBI forensic accountants. Hensley appeared in court looking like a man who hadn't slept in days, which he probably hadn't, and offered only token resistance to Nadine's evidence. The forged deed, the dead notary's stamp, the pattern of fraud that stretched back 5 years and encompassed 43 properties. Judge Hammond listened to everything, asked clarifying questions, made notes. Then she ruled. The court finds that the deed dated October 15th of last year, purporting to transfer the property at 4721 River Road from Eugenia Achebe to Northland Development Corporation, is fraudulent and void. The property is hereby restored to the estate of Eugenia Achebe, with Nadine Achebe confirmed as sole heir and owner. The gavel came down. It was over. But justice, Nadine knew, was never really over. It was a process, not an event, a river, not a destination. The federal cases would take months to resolve. Preliminary hearings, discovery, plea negotiations. Some defendants would cooperate, others would fight. The trial of those who didn't plead guilty might not begin until the following year. Harlan was charged with conspiracy and civil rights violations under color of law. He pleaded not guilty at his arraignment, released on $200,000 bond, stripped of his judgeship pending resolution of the charges. His lawyers claimed he was a scapegoat, that he'd been manipulated by Northland, that he hadn't known about the forged deeds. No one believed them. Merriweather pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. She received 18 months in federal prison and agreed to testify against her co-defendants. Her cooperation proved valuable. She had emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls that documented the conspiracy in granular detail. Kellner pleaded guilty to civil rights violations and assault. The incident at Eugenia's house, his armed confrontation with Nadine, added charges to an already lengthy indictment. He received 4 years. Jernigan pleaded guilty to intimidation and obstruction. 2 years. He'd been the muscle, not the brains. His sentence reflected that distinction. Hensley fought the charges for 3 months, then accepted a plea deal when his former colleagues began testifying against him. He was disbarred immediately and sentenced to 6 years for his role in the conspiracy. Victor Stanton, the corrupt AUSA, received the harshest sentence, 15 years. A federal prosecutor who betrayed his oath deserved, in the court's view, exemplary punishment. And Judge Castellano, the Eighth Circuit judge whose photograph had started Nadine's involvement with the FBI, remained under investigation. His case was complex, the evidence requiring careful assembly. Reeves told Nadine it might be another year before charges were filed. Some threads remained unresolved, some justice remained delayed, but progress had been made. 6 months after the evidentiary hearing, Nadine returned to Stillwater. The town looked the same: historic buildings, the lift bridge over the St. Croix, tourists browsing antique shops. But something had changed. The courthouse felt different. The air felt cleaner. The weight of corruption had been lifted, if not entirely, then enough to notice. She drove to River Road, parked in the driveway of Eugenia's house, her house now, legally and finally. The roses were still blooming. She'd hired a local gardener to maintain them during the months she'd been in Washington. He'd done good work. Eugenia would have approved. Inside, the house was quiet. She'd had the locks changed, the security system upgraded, the damage from Kellner's search repaired. It looked almost exactly as it had when Eugenia was alive. The velvet sofa, the dining table, the piano in the corner. Nadine sat at the kitchen table, spread out the documents she'd brought. Not legal filings this time, but something else. Property records. For the 43 homes Northland had stolen. The FBI's investigation had identified all the victims. Some had died, their estates scattered. Some had moved away, given up, accepted their losses. But 12 families had been located. 12 families who might be able to reclaim what was taken from them. The process would be complicated. Quiet title actions would need to be filed. Evidence would need to be presented. The properties that Northland had already developed would require different approaches, financial compensation rather than restoration. But it was possible. With the right legal help, the right resources, the right determination. Nadine had all 3. She picked up her phone, dialed a number she'd been given by Dorothy Stokes, a legal aid organization in Minneapolis that specialized in property rights. Good morning. My name is Nadine Achebe. I'd like to discuss a pro bono project involving multiple families who lost their homes to fraud. I have documentation, funding, and time. What I need is attorneys willing to do the work. The voice on the other end paused. Did you say Nadine Achebe? As in justice? As in the woman whose aunt lived on River Road for 81 years? As in someone who understands what it means to fight for your home? Nadine looked out the window at the Mississippi, flowing past like it had for 10,000 years. I'm not calling as a Supreme Court justice. I'm calling as a neighbor. Are you interested in helping? A long pause. Then, yes, Justice Achebe. We're very interested. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell is about justice, accountability, and the power of standing up. The following spring, Nadine attended the first of the restoration hearings, Dorothy Stokes's case, the house she'd lost 2 years earlier to the same scheme that had targeted Eugenia, the same forged deed, the same dead notary, the same pattern of corruption. Dorothy sat at the respondent's table, flanked by 2 attorneys from the legal aid organization. She wore her Sunday best, the same floral dress she'd worn to Nadine's hearing a year ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for the judge to speak. Judge Hammond presided. She'd become the de facto authority on Northland-related cases, her reputation for fairness drawing assignments from across the district. In the matter of Dorothy Stokes versus Northland Development Corporation, Hammond read from her prepared ruling, the court finds that the deed dated March 12, 2022, was obtained through fraud and is hereby declared void. The property at 1708 Elm Street is restored to Ms. Stokes, effective immediately. Dorothy burst into tears. Nadine, sitting in the gallery, felt her own eyes sting. This was why she'd fought. This was why she'd risked her reputation, her career, her safety, not for abstract principles, for real people, real homes, real justice. After the hearing, Dorothy found her in the hallway. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me." Nadine took her hands. "You kept fighting when everyone told you to give up. You saved your documents when it would have been easier to throw them away. You did the hard work. I just helped where I could." "You did more than help." Dorothy's voice cracked. "You gave me hope." "And hope." She wiped her eyes. "Hope is everything." The drive back to Washington took 2 days. Nadine could have flown, should have flown, probably. The Supreme Court term was starting, and she had briefs to review, opinions to write, the endless work of the nation's highest court. But she wanted the time, the space, the miles of highway to process everything that had happened. Harlan's trial had concluded the month before, guilty on all counts. He'd received 7 years, less than Nadine thought he deserved, more than his lawyers had hoped. He'd be in his 70s when he got out. His judicial career was over, his reputation destroyed. But the system that had protected him for 22 years remained largely intact. Yes, there were new oversight mechanisms. Yes, the Judicial Conduct Committee had implemented reforms. But the fundamental structures, the deference to sitting judges, the presumption of good faith, the reluctance to investigate complaints, those hadn't changed. Maybe they couldn't change. Maybe the system was designed to protect itself, and any reform would be absorbed, neutralized, worked around. Or maybe change came slowly, incrementally, one case at a time. Eugenia's voice echoed in her memory. Justice is a river. Sometimes it flows smooth, sometimes it floods, and sometimes you have to dig the channel yourself. Nadine had dug. The channel was wider now than it had been a year ago. Not wide enough. Never wide enough, but wider. That had to count for something. She stopped in Stillwater one last time before heading east. The house on River Road was quiet, empty. She'd decided not to sell it. Not yet, anyway. Maybe not ever. 5 generations of history deserved preservation, even if she couldn't live there full time. She'd hired a caretaker, a young woman from the AME church where Eugenia had taught Sunday school. The roses would be maintained. The house would be watched. The legacy would continue. Nadine stood on the porch, looking out at the Mississippi. The river was high with spring snowmelt, flowing fast and brown toward the Gulf, carrying water that had fallen as snow in the North Woods, carrying sediment from farms and cities, carrying everything the land released into its current, carrying, in its way, a kind of justice. Natural, inevitable, slow. She thought about everything that remained unfinished. Castellano was still under investigation. Reeves had called last week to say indictment was expected by summer, but nothing was certain. 3 of the Northland executives had fled the country before their arrests. International extradition was being pursued, but the process could take years. 2 of the 12 families whose homes had been stolen had died during the legal proceedings. Their estates would have to be settled before restoration could occur. And somewhere, in courthouses across the country, other judges were making other rulings, some fair, some not, some corrupt in ways that would never be discovered, some honest in ways that would never be recognized. The system continued. The river flowed. Justice remained imperfect, incomplete, perpetually in process. But this house still stood. This family's legacy survived. This small piece of the world had been made right. Nadine locked the front door, walked to her car, and drove east toward Washington, toward the Supreme Court. toward the work that waited. Behind her, the Mississippi flowed on. The Judicial Conduct and Disability Committee's report was released on a Tuesday in March. 47 pages, single-spaced, documenting patterns of bias, procedural violations, and misconduct in courthouses across 12 states. The Stillwater investigation had been the catalyst, but the findings extended far beyond one county in Minnesota. Recommended reforms included mandatory bias training for all state court judges, standardized complaint procedures, independent investigation of allegations involving financial conflicts, and regular audits of case outcomes by demographic category. Not all the recommendations would be implemented. Nadine knew that. Politics would intervene, budgets would be cited, the system would protect itself, as systems always did. But the report existed. The documentation was public. The pattern had been named. That was something. See, Judge Raymond Castellano was indicted in June. 17 counts of bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He pleaded not guilty, retained a team of expensive defense attorneys, and prepared for a trial that wouldn't begin until the following year. His name was quietly removed from the Supreme Court shortlist. Dorothy Stokes moved back into her house on Elm Street. She planted a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, peppers, squash. She started a support group for families affected by predatory property schemes. She testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger protections against deed fraud. She sent Nadine a Christmas card with a photograph of her garden, flourishing in the July sun. The 12 families received various forms of justice. 8 had their properties restored through the court proceedings. 2 received financial settlements from Northland's bankruptcy estate. Not full value, but something. 2 cases remained pending, tangled in procedural complications that might take years to resolve. Imperfect outcomes, partial victories, the normal arithmetic of justice in a system designed by humans. Nadine wrote the majority opinion in a case involving property rights that term. The facts were different. A dispute over mineral rights in Oklahoma, nothing to do with Minnesota or fraud or corruption, but the underlying principles were the same. Property was fundamental. Ownership mattered. The law existed to protect those who had earned what they possessed, not to facilitate those who sought to take it. Justice Achebe, writing for the court, found in favor of the plaintiffs. The opinion was 7 pages long, dry, technical, full of citations and precedents that only lawyers would read. But buried in the final paragraph was a sentence that meant more to Nadine than all the legal analysis that preceded it. Property is not merely an economic concept. It is the foundation upon which families build their lives, preserve their histories, and pass their legacies to future generations. The law must protect that foundation, or the law fails its most basic purpose. She thought of Eugenia when she wrote it. She thought of the house on River Road. She thought of the river itself, flowing toward the sea, carrying everything the land entrusted to its current. Justice was slow. Justice was incomplete. Justice was a river that sometimes flooded and sometimes ran dry. But justice was also persistent, patient, inevitable in its own way. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, justice prevailed.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.